I mean, that's a massive displacement of people. What will happen once that happens?
Well, as you said, I think it's going to be disastrous. Where if you look at truck drivers alone, being a trucker is the most common job in 29 states. There are 3.5 million truck drivers in this country. And my friends in Silicon Valley are working on trucks that can drive themselves because that's where the money is, where we can save tens, even hundreds of billions of dollars by trying to automate that job. But I was just with truck drivers in Iowa last week, and imagining that community recovering from their income going from, let's call it $50,000 a year to much, much less than that catastrophically, it's going to be a disaster for many, many American communities.
You're one of the only people I've ever met who's honest about the effects of deindustrialization. I remember in Washington, the idea was they'll all become computer programmers, and so everything is fine, but that didn't happen. My question is, do we have to sit passively back and let this happen to the country?
Well, that's why I'm running for president, Tucker, is I think it would be insane to just sit back and watch this automation wave overtake our communities and our economy. So we're not ostriches. We can get our heads up out of the sand and say, look, we get it. Artificial intelligence is real. Self-driving cars and trucks are being tested on the highways right now, and we need to evolve. We need to actually start pushing the way we think of economic progress to include how our families are doing, how our children are doing, and things that would actually matter to the American people, because GDP is going to lead us off a cliff. You know, robot trucks, great for GDP, terrible for many, many American communities. So we need to get with the program and figure out how to actually make this economy work for people.
I sit with my jaw open. I agree with you so strongly. Let me ask you finally, why isn't this a central question in the campaign of everybody running for president on any side? And why instead are they talking about issues that really are kind of frivolous? Why aren't they talking about this?
You know, it's a good question, Tucker. I mean, one of the reasons I'm running for president is to push this into the center of the mainstream agenda, where every candidate should be talking about what we're going to do about the fact that we're automating away the most common jobs in the economy right now. As we're sitting here together, the labor force participation rate in the United States is 63.2%, the same level as Ecuador and Costa Rica. And if anyone thinks that's where America ought to be, I mean, that number is even going to be further challenged when all this technology comes online. So we have to make America embrace this challenge of the 21st century and then try and address it together as a people.
Last question. Shouldn't people who cite unemployment statistics be penalized for saying something so stupid?
Yeah, we have a series of bad numbers, and I referred to GDP as one. Certainly, the headline unemployment rate is completely misleading. Yes. And one of my mandates as president is I'm going to update the numbers so they actually make sense to the American people.
Yes. So we can know what's going on. Otherwise, we can't make wise decisions.
Yeah, right now, again, and you know this, our life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years, first time in 100 years because of a surge in suicides and drug overdoses. How can you say an economy is healthy when our people are dying? It makes no sense.
I literally couldn't. I don't even know what you think on the other issues, and I just support what you said so much. I appreciate your coming on.
Thank you, Tucker. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
This is a really important point. We don't have Washington filled with a bunch of criminals. Members of Congress are not bad people. All of them go to Congress, I think, whether you agree with their policies or not, for the right reasons. They're all trying to do good. But then they find themselves in the middle of the system that forces them, if they're going to survive, to behave like this. And so I think one really important thing is to stop vilifying people as if they're evil people and just take on the system, which I think is the interesting perspective somebody like an entrepreneur brings to this type of question, because you look at problems and you think, what's the twist that might make this problem go away?
Yes, and I will say that I think you all, if you're here, you're thinking in these same terms. You're looking up and you're seeing that there's something twisted and messed up and imperfect about various processes, certainly campaign finance. And it's very tempting to then demonize people on the other end of it. And sometimes, you know, they're doing really unsavory things. But what we have to do is we have to focus on fixing the system that is distorting and dehumanizing various people, turning them into economic actors very, very often. That is the mission that we all must be on. You all have this almost sacred trust to try and safeguard the rest of the country from this broken down system that is on the verge of pushing us off this precipice, after which there will be no coming back. And you can all feel it. Like, we're all heading in that direction. That's why I'm running for president. I'm not running for president because I fantasized about ever being president. I'm running for president because I'm an American and I'm a parent, and I can see the country we will leave to our children. And it is not something that I'm willing to accept. I was just with a bunch of truck drivers in Iowa last week, and there's a guy, Dennis Bogaski, that gave me a ride from Altoona to Grinnell in Iowa, where I've been campaigning. And the truth of it, Joe, is that there are 3.5 million truck drivers in this country right now. It's the most common job in 29 states. And the average trucker is a 49-year-old guy with a high school education, maybe ex-military like Dennis was, and they're making like $50,000 a year. So then if you say, hey, I'm going to retrain 500,000 truck drivers, for what exactly is like issue number one?
Right.
And then these guys didn't love school 30 years ago. It's not like driving a truck has made them really excited about the idea.
Yeah.
And then the new job you're training them for, I looked into the data as to how good we were at retraining, let's say, displaced manufacturing workers in the Midwest when we started decimating their jobs. And we're terrible at it. Like, according to independent studies, government-funded retraining programs had a success rate of between 0 and 15% in real life. Like, this is what actually happened to the workers of Michigan and Indiana and Ohio. And so if you say we're going to retrain these people, then you also have to come up with a way for us to become amazing at something that right now we're really, really bad at. And if you were an employer, which you are, would you rather employ a 50-year-old former truck driver with health problems who got some certificate program? Or would you rather hire a 25-year-old kid who went to community college, is probably cheaper, has lower expectations, and his skills are natively going to be a little fresher? I mean, if you were an employer, you'd probably choose number two.
I agree, but I'm trying to look at this through rose-colored glasses, I guess. I'm trying to think if there's a way that these people can adapt.
You know, I mean, some will, for sure. You can retrain and reskill some people. But if you look at even the conversations we're having around this, where people legitimately talk about retraining coal miners to be software engineers, stuff that on the face of it makes no sense. But the reason why we're stretching for that is because we're looking for some kind of retraining-oriented solution when the numbers show that that's just not going to be the recipe, therefore actual success.
And this is where this whole learn to code controversy is coming out online, where people are actually getting banned for writing learn to code. It's really a hot subject on Twitter. And it's very confusing, too, and I haven't really gotten an explanation for why that's such an offensive thing to say. But people are getting banned for even joking around, saying learn to code. It's very weird. But the idea behind it is that it's kind of preposterous to ask someone who doesn't have an education to do something that's as difficult as code, computer language.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we're going to get to a point where AI can do some basic coding at a certain level. So if you think about the impulse to say learn to code, what it's really saying is you need to do something that the market values. It's like, hey, being a truck driver, the market's not going to value that much when the trucks start driving themselves in the next 5 to 10 years. So what does the market value? And then people are like, well, coding and STEM and engineering skills. And so there's a drive to try and push people in those directions. But if you look at the numbers, about 8% of American jobs right now are in STEM fields, like in technology, engineering, math, etc. So you're talking about 92% of the population that is not in those fields, and it's unrealistic to expect that 92% to somehow shift into the 8%.
Right, and there even be places for them there.
Yeah, and that's true too.
Even if they perfectly seamlessly transition, there's too many people for those jobs.
Yeah, so I've been driven to universal basic income in part because I've been looking at the numbers. The 5 most common jobs in the United States right now are administrative and clerical work, retail and sales, food service and food prep, truck driving and transportation and manufacturing. Those 5 jobs comprise about half of all American jobs. Only 32% of Americans graduate from college. So the average American's a high school grad doing one of these 5 jobs. And if you look at it, technology is already doing a number on each of these jobs. Like the first, administrative and clerical, includes call center workers, and AI is in the process of taking over that job. Retail and sales, 30% of malls are closing in the next 4 years. So the danger here is to think of it as artificial intelligence is coming. It's actually already eating up the most common jobs in our economy, and it's driving Americans into distress in various ways in the numbers.